The chapel floor at Renfield gave way beneath her knee on the coldest morning of the year, and in the hollow it opened. Esther Coyle found the thing that would either save the Earl of Havering or hang him. She had been scrubbing the flagstones near the altar rail, as she did every second morning of her service, when one worn square of slate rocked under her weight and slid a finger's breadth to the left. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth gone brown with age, lay a single playing card, and a folded paper sealed with black wax. The card was the knave of spades, its corner cut clean away. On the paper, in a hand pressed hard enough to tear the fibers, someone had written a name, a date, and one word that stopped the breath in her throat. Traitor, beside it, the name of the man whose bread she ate. Julian Ashby, Earl of Havering. She knelt there a long while with her rag forgotten, and the cold rising through her skirts, and she did not put the slate back. What she did not yet know was that a man 3 counties away had spent 11 years searching for exactly this hollow, and that her finding it first would place her between the Earl and the grave that had been dug for him in another season under another sky. You will want to know how a chambermaid came to be scrubbing a chapel that grand, and why the finding of a card should matter more than gold. Stay a while. The morning is long, and the story turns on a woman the house had already decided not to see. To the household at Renfield, Esther was the girl who did the cold work. She laid the fires before the family woke, and scrubbed the flags after they slept, and in the hours between she was expected to move through the great rooms like a draft, felt and not observed. She was 23, though the housekeeper, Mrs. Alderton, spoke of her as though she were younger and slower than she was, and Esther had learned to let her. She had come to the house 8 months earlier with a reference in a dead woman's hand, and a father's debt she would never speak aloud, and she had learned in her first week that a servant who is thought clever is watched, while a servant thought dull is left alone. She chose to be left alone. It was the only privacy her station allowed her. Renfield itself was a house in mourning, without a corpse to mourn. Its master, the Earl of Havering, had returned from the war 2 winters past, and had not, by any account the servants could gather, smiled since. He kept to the east wing, and the library, and the long gallery where his family's portraits hung, and he rode out alone at first light in weather that kept other men indoors. The maid said he was cold. The footman said he was proud. Mrs. Mannon, Alderton said, in the low voice she used, for judgments she meant to stand, that he was a man with a shadow on him, and that a wise girl kept clear of shadows. The Dowager Countess, his aunt by marriage, said something crueler, and said it often. Lady Sabine Havering had ruled the house through the old Earl's decline, and had not surrendered the ruling when her nephew inherited. She was a woman of exact diamonds and exacter opinions, and she had decided, in the manner of women who have never once been wrong to their own faces, that Julian was unfit to hold what he held. She said it first to her companion in the morning room on a day Esther happened to be laying the grate, and she said it as though the girl on her knees at the hearth were a piece of the furniture. "A traitor's blood tells," Lady Sabine said, turning a letter over in her gloved hand. Whatever the courts declined to prove, Esther kept her eyes on the coals. She had learned to hear everything and hold none of it in her face. Even so, the word settled in her the way a stone settles in still water, sinking and staying, and she carried it out of the room with her, and did not set it down. She had not understood it then. She understood it now, kneeling on the chapel floor with the black-sealed paper in her raw hands, and the same word written before her, in a stranger's furious script. A traitor's blood tells. Someone had wanted this found. Someone else had wanted it lost, and she, who was meant to be no one, had put her knee on the seam between the two. The proper thing, the safe thing, was to carry the card and the paper straight to Mrs. Alderton and let the house decide what the house would do. Esther considered it for the length of one cold breath. Then she thought of Lady Sabine's gloved hand turning the letter, and the letter she herself had carried unopened from the morning room to the post 3 days running that week, all addressed in the dowager's hand to a solicitor in town, and she folded the oilcloth back around its contents and slid it into the deep pocket beneath her apron instead. She set the slate back. True. She finished the floor. Her hands did not shake until she was alone in the scullery passage, and then they shook so that she had to press them flat against the cold wall to still them. That evening the Earl came upon her in the long gallery, and it was the first time he had ever looked at her as though she were a person, and not a draft. She had lingered past her hour, which she never did, drawn to the gallery by a thing she could not have named. The portraits watched her from the walls, generations of Ashby faces, and at the end of the row hung the one the maids whispered of, a young officer in a red coat, with the Earl's own grey eyes, painted before the war, took the man who painted like him. Esther stood before it with her candle, and she was thinking of the card, and she did not hear the door. "You are not permitted here after dark," the Earl said. She turned too fast, and the candle guttered. He stood in the doorway in his riding coat, tall and still, his dark hair damp from the weather, his face carved and shadowed in the low light. The maids had not lied about the coldness. They had not seen what she saw now, which was that his eyes had gone at once to the portrait behind her, and then away from it, as a man looks away from a wound he cannot dress. "I beg your pardon, my lord," Esther said, and dropped her curtsy, and did not run, though every instinct she owned told her to run. He did not dismiss her. He crossed the gallery instead, slow, and stopped an arm's length away, and looked at her as though she were a page he could not quite read. "You are the girl who does the fires," he said. Coyle. That he knew her name undid something. In her she had thought long since bolted shut. "Yes, my lord. Why are you here, Coyle?" She might have lied. She was good at lying, in the small survivable ways a servant must be. His eyes had gone again to the portrait, though, and something in the naked grief of that glance made the lie taste like ash. "I came to look at him, my lord," she said the officer. "Forgive me. I do not know why." For a long moment, the Earl said nothing. The candle steadied between them. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, gone low and level and stripped of its authority. "That is my brother," he said. "Edmund. He died at Corunna. I was his commanding officer." He paused. "Go to bed, Coyle, and do not come here again." It was a command, and it was cold, and inside it, unmistakable to her now, though she could not have said how she knew, was a man asking to be left alone, with a grief he could not carry in company. She went. At the door she turned, and she saw him standing before the portrait, with his head bowed and one hand pressed flat to his own chest as though to hold something in, and she carried that image out with her, and set it beside the card, and did not sleep. In the days that followed, she made a study of the house she had spent 8 months, learning not to see. She could not have said why she did it. She told herself it was fear, that a girl holding a paper that named an Earl, a traitor, was a girl who needed to know which way the wind set. It was not only fear. It was the memory of a hand pressed flat to a chest, and the certainty, growing in her against all sense, that the coldness the house had decided upon was a lie the house told itself. She learned that Lady Sabine's letters to the solicitor in town had begun the week the old Earl died, and had not stopped. She learned that a gentleman had twice come to Renfield to dine, and had twice been closeted with the dowager for hours after, a lean man with a lawyer's stoop and a habit of watching the servants whom the household called Mr. Prentice. She learned that the chapel, disused since the old Earl's funeral, was to be reconsecrated in the spring for a purpose no one had explained, and that Lady Sabine had lately taken an interest in its repair, that she had shown no chapel in living memory. Esther knelt on the flagstone that had rocked beneath her knee, and understood that the dowager had wanted the floor lifted, and had wanted it lifted by hands she controlled, and that a chambermaid scrubbing where she was not expected had spoiled a plan 11 years in the setting. She did not yet know whose plan. She knew only that the card in her pocket was a thing men had died to hide, and that she held it, and that holding it made her, for the first time in her invisible life, a person with the power to decide something. The dowager voiced the word a second time on the morning of the winter assembly, and this time she voiced it to a room full of people, and this time Esther was not furniture, but standing at the door with the wraps, and heard it land. The assembly was held in the great drawing room, the county's lesser gentry come to pay their respects to a house they were half afraid of, and the Earl stood at the head of the room in dark blue and white, and did not once smile. Lady Sabine moved among the guests like a woman distributing weather. Beside her, in ice blue silk and a great many pearls, walked Miss Cordelia Marsh, a beauty of the neighborhood whom the dowager had lately taken up, and whom, the servants understood, the dowager intended for her nephew. Whether her nephew intended it or no. Quote, Esther watched from the door and saw the Earl decline, with cold courtesy, to be steered toward the girl in ice blue, and saw Lady Sabine's fan pause a half-inch too high at the refusal, and saw the calculation move behind the dowager's eyes like a fish under ice. "My nephew forgets himself," Lady Sabine said low to Miss Marsh, but not so low that the girl at the door could not hear it. "One makes allowances. A traitor's son learns his father's habits. He will come to sense, or he will be brought to it." Miss Marsh laughed, the small laugh of a girl who has been told all her life she is the correct choice, and has never once had cause to doubt it. Esther at the door felt the word go through her a second time, deeper now, because now she held the paper that made the word a weapon and not merely a spite. A traitor's son. She understood, standing there with a lady's wrap heavy over her arm, that the dowager did not merely dislike her nephew, the dowager meant to unmake him, and somewhere in the house's cold bones lay the means. And Esther had it folded against her heart. She might have carried it to him that night. She lay awake turning it, the impulse and the terror of it. She was a chambermaid, though, and he was an earl. And a girl of her station did not walk up to a peer of the realm and hand him a paper that named his blood a traitor. Not without knowing what the paper meant, and not without knowing whether the giving would save him or damn him further. She resolved to learn first. It was the resolution of a careful woman, and it cost her dearly, for while she learned, the dowager moved. What Esther learned, she learned, in pieces, over 3 cold weeks. In the way a servant learns anything, which is by being present and being unregarded. She learned that the black-sealed paper was not the whole of it, that the card was a token, a thing meant to be matched to its twin, and that a man who held both halves held proof of something. She learned from a half-burned letter she drew from the morning-room grate with the ash still warm, that Mr. Sefton Dowler Prentice was not the dowager's solicitor, but her instrument, and that the word treason appeared in his correspondence beside a date, 11 years gone, the year the old Earl's younger son had first gone for a soldier. And she learned, kneeling again at the chapel floor she could not leave alone, that the hollow had held 2 things once, for the oilcloth bore the ghost of a second parcel long since taken, and that whoever had taken it had left the card behind either by accident or by design. She was piecing it together in the scullery by candle one night, when the Earl found her again, and this time he had come looking. He filled the low doorway in his shirt-sleeves without his coat, which she had never seen, and the sight of him so unguarded stopped her hand on the card. She rose too fast. The card fell face up on the deal table between them, the knave of spades with its corner cut away, and she saw him see it, and she saw the blood leave his face. "Where did you find that?" the Earl said. His voice was very quiet. It was the quiet of a man standing at the edge of something, but a long drop beneath. "Beneath the chapel floor, my lord," Esther said. There was no lie left in her that would serve 3 weeks past. "A slate rocked, and I found the hollow. There was a paper with it. It names your house a traitor, and it bears your name. And I have not shown it to a living soul, and I did not know what else in the world to do." The Earl reached out and turned the card with one finger, and looked at it a long time, and when he lifted his eyes to her, they were not cold at all. "My brother cut that card," he said, "the night before Corunna. He gave me its match, and kept this one, and he said if ever I found its twin returned to me, I should know he had been proven right, and that a man we both trusted had sold his company to the French for a purse of gold." He stopped. His jaw worked. Edmund died believing no one would ever prove it. He died a traitor's name, in some men's mouths, for a crime another man committed. And I have spent 2 years looking for the proof he swore existed, and could not find it, and had begun to believe I had buried him under a lie. Esther stood very still. The candle burned between them, and the cold pressed at the scullery window, and she understood, all at once and entirely, that the grief the house had called coldness was this. Not pride, not a traitor's guilty blood. A brother and a lie, and 2 years of a man riding out alone at dawn to look for a thing he could not find. It was in the chapel, my lord, she said softly. The whole of it was in the chapel. And Lady Sabine has been having the chapel floor made ready to be lifted. The Earl went very still. Say that again. She said it again. She told him all of it. The letters to the solicitor who was not a solicitor. The word treason beside the date, 11 years gone. The ghost of a second parcel in the oilcloth. Mr. Prentice closeted for hours the dowager's certainty that a traitor's blood would tell. And as she spoke, she watched 2 years of grief reorganize themselves behind the Earl's gray eyes into something else, something with an edge to it, and when she had finished, he said, Only you might have taken this to her. It would have bought your freedom from service and more. I might have, my lord, Esther said. But I laid the fire the morning she called your brother a traitor to a room she thought held no one but the furniture. And I did not believe her. I could not have told you why. I only did not believe her. Something moved in the Earl's face then that no one at Renfield had seen in 2 years. It was not a smile. It was the country. A smile comes from, though. Coil, he said, and stopped, and seemed to find the single syllable of it insufficient. What is your Christian name? Esther. My lord. Esther. He said it as though he were setting something down carefully on a shelf where it would not break. You have done a braver thing than you know, and a more dangerous one. If my aunt learns you hold that card, she will not trouble to dismiss you. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. You will give it to me, and you will let me carry the danger, because it is mine to carry. And you have carried it long enough. It was a command. She heard the protection folded inside it as plainly as she heard the words. She did not give him the card. No, my lord, she said, and watched surprise move across his features. You will forgive me. The card is a token, though, and it is only half. There is a twin, and a second parcel. And a man named Prentice who has both or knows where they are. If you go to your aunt with half a proof, you give her time to burn the rest. I have watched her burn letters 3 weeks running. She is careful. You must be more careful than she is, and you cannot be careful if you are also grieving and also angry, and you are both. She heard herself say it, and could not believe she had said it, a chambermaid to an earl, and she lifted her chin and did not take it back. I am neither. I am only the girl who does the fires. No one watches me. Let me be the one who watches her. The Earl looked at her for a long moment in the candlelight. And what was in his face was not command and was not coldness. It was something like the look a man gives a door he had thought was a wall. Esther Coil, he said. Who taught you to think like a general? My father, my lord, she said. Before the debt, he said the side that sees the whole board wins, and the side that moves first loses. He was often wrong about money. He was never wrong about that, and there in the scullery, in his shirt-sleeves with the cold at the glass, the Earl of Havering did the thing the whole county would have sworn him incapable of. He inclined his head to a chambermaid, gravely as to an equal, and he said, Then we will see the whole board together, and we will move last. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Esther's life, and the fullest. By day she was the girl who did the fires, invisible, unregarded, moving through the house like a draught. By night, when the household slept, she went to the library by a servant's passage she had scouted. And there the Earl spread what he knew across the great table. and she spread what she had seen. And the two halves of a thing 11 years hidden began slowly to become whole. She learned his brother's story from his own mouth, in fragments, across those cold nights. How Edmund had discovered that a fellow officer, a man of good family named Vane, had passed the disposition of their company to the enemy before Corunna, and had been murdered for the discovering, and had been named a coward and a traitor by the very man who killed him, so that the truth died with him and the lie lived on. How Vane had come home a hero and married well and prospered. How the old Earl had died believing his younger son a traitor, because a clever man had made certain he would. And how Lady Sabine, who had never loved the branch of the family that produced Julian, had taken up Vane's cause as her own, the moment she understood that proving the old lie kept her nephew forever under her thumb, and disproving it set him free. She does not know Edmund left proof, the Earl said one night, his hand flat on the table beside the cut cart. She believes the only danger is a rumor she can manage. If she knew a paper existed in his hand, she would tear this house to its stones to find it. He looked up. You found it first, Esther. Do you understand what that means? She has been lifting the wrong floors. Esther understood. She also understood something the Earl, in his grief and his fury, had not yet let himself see, which was that the nearness of them across that table in the low library light had become a thing with its own weather. She was aware of exactly where he was in any room now without looking. When his hand moved near hers on the table, she felt the warmth of it before it arrived. She told herself it was the danger, the shared secret, the way any two people bound in a hidden purpose will lean toward one another. She told herself it was nothing a chambermaid could allow herself to feel for an Earl. And her body, which had never once lied to her, went on knowing better than her mind. She learned, in those weeks, that Mr. Prentice kept his correspondence in a locked case he carried, and that he was to come again to Renfield for the reconsecration of the chapel in the spring, and that the reconsecration was the whole of the dowager's design, for she meant to have the floor lifted with the county watching, to find nothing where she believed nothing to be. And so, to prove the chapel innocent, and clear the ground for a different burial, she meant to move Edmund's remains. She meant to have him disinterred from the family vault, where the old Earl at the last had grudgingly allowed him to lie, and cast out as a traitor should be, and she had procured through Prentice the legal instrument to compel it. That was the second parcel's purpose. That was what had been taken from the hollow. Not the proof of Edmund's innocence, the forged proof of his guilt, planted to be found. She means to bury the lie in the ground where I would look for the truth, the Earl said, and his voice when he said it was terrible in its quiet. And to have the county witness it. Then we let her, Esther said. He turned on her a look of such astonishment that she almost lost her nerve. She did not lose it. We let her lift the floor, Esther said. We let her bring the county. We let Prentice bring his case and his forged parcel, and lay it all out in the light, where every gentleman in the neighborhood can see it. And then, my lord, when she has staked everything on that floor being empty of the truth, you produce the truth, the card, the paper in your brother's hand, in front of all of them, in the very chapel where she meant to bury him twice. She was breathing hard. She has built her whole design on the certainty that no proof survives. Let her build it all the way to the top, then take the bottom stone out. The library was silent for a long moment. Then the Earl of Havering laughed. Once, low and rough and disused, the laugh of a man who has not laughed in 2 years and has forgotten the shape of it, and Esther felt that single sound in her chest like a hand laid over her heart. "You frightening woman," he said with something in his voice that was not fear at all. "Where were you when I was losing this war alone?" "Laying your fires, my lord," she said. "You did not look down." "I am looking now," he said, and the words changed the air between them, and neither of them moved, and the candle burned very low, and in the small silence that followed, she understood that they had crossed from purpose into something with no name that a chambermaid was permitted to say aloud. He reached once, and his finger stopped a hand's breadth from hers on the table, and hovered there, and did not close the distance, because he was a man of honor, and she was in his employ and dependent on his protection, and the closing of that distance could not be an equal thing while she stood beneath his roof, at his mercy. He drew his hand back. She had seen it reach, though, and he had seen her not draw away. And that was its own kind of speech, and they both heard it, and neither of them slept. The dowager voiced the word a third time on the eve of the reconsecration, and Esther heard it reported to her by another servant, which was the third setting and the cruelest, for it meant the word had spread past the house and into the county's mouth. The under-housemaid, Nell, brought it to her breathless. In the scullery, the whole neighborhood was speaking of it, Nell said. Lady Sabine had let it be known that the chapel would be opened before witnesses, and that a matter of the old Earl's younger son would be settled once and for all, and that the county should come and see how a great house cleansed itself of a traitor. The word was everywhere now. It had left the morning room, where Esther first heard it whispered over a grate, and had grown, and had become a public thing, an event, a spectacle, with a date. Tomorrow. And Esther understood, hearing it, that the dowager had done exactly what she and the Earl had wanted her to do, had staked the whole of her authority and her design and her certainty on that chapel floor in front of the county tomorrow, and that everything now turned on a card in the Earl's breast pocket and a paper in a dead man's hand. That night the design nearly died. Mrs. Alderton came to the scullery an hour before midnight, and her face was not the housekeeper's face. Lady Sabine had asked after the chambermaid, Coyle, she said. Had asked whether the girl had been much about the chapel. Had asked whether she was clever. And Mrs. Alderton, who had spent her life keeping her place by answering the questions the family asked, had answered honestly that the girl was quiet and hard-working and no trouble, and had seen, too late, that the answer had not satisfied. "She has taken a notion about you," Mrs. Alderton said, low and afraid. "I do not know what, when Lady Sabine takes a notion about a servant, though the servant does not stay. You are to be turned off in the morning, before the county comes. She said it was tidiness. It was not tidiness. Esther, what have you done?" Esther stood in the cold scullery, and felt the whole careful board tilt beneath her. If she were turned off before dawn, she would be gone before the chapel opened, put out the gate with her box and her reference, and no standing at all to speak, and the Earl would be left to produce a card whose provenance rested on the word of a dismissed maid the dowager could paint as a thief and a liar. The dowager had not needed to find the proof. She had only needed to remove the one witness who could give it a history. And she had found the seam, the way Esther had found the seam in the floor, and put her weight on it. Esther did not go to the Earl. She wanted to, with an urgency that frightened her. It was the middle of the night, though, and she was a maid and he was an Earl, and to be found going to his rooms after dark. On the eve of this was to hand the dowager the very weapon she was reaching for. So she sat alone in the cold with the whole thing tilting, and she did the hardest thing she had ever done, which was to trust that the man she had chosen to believe in would, when the moment came, look down and see her as he had promised. She wrote nothing. She sent nothing. She laid the morning fires as she always did, and she let herself be turned off at the gate at dawn with her box in her arms, and she stood outside the walls of Renfield in the grey cold and did not weep, and waited, because it was all that was left to her, to see whether the whole board she had seen so clearly would hold without her hand on it. It held. Not the way she had planned, though the county came to Renfield through the morning, carriages and horses on the frozen drive. The lesser gentry in their winter best come to see a great house settle its dark account. They gathered in the chapel, where 2 winters past the old Earl had been laid to rest, and Lady Sabine received them in grey silk and diamonds, with Miss Marsh at her side, and Mr. Prentice at her shoulder, his locked case in his hand. The dowager was magnificent. She had waited 11 years for this, and she wore the waiting like a crown. She spoke of duty, and of a family's honor, and of the sad necessity of proving what the courts had been too timid to prove, and she gave the word to the men with the bars, and the flagstones came up. Esther was not there to see it. She stood outside the gate in the cold with her box. She learned it. After all of it, from those who had crowded the chapel door, and she learned that the floor came up to show a hollow, and that Mr. Prentice stepped forward with his case and produced from it a packet of papers. He named as found beneath that very floor, correspondence in the young Edmund Ashby's hand. He said, proving the man had passed his company's disposition to the French for gold. He laid the forged proof in the light, and the county leaned in to see it. And Lady Sabine stood at the head of the chapel, with the whole neighborhood witnessing her vindication, and she did not smile, because she was too great for smiling, but the triumph came off her like heat off a hearth. And then the Earl of Havering, who had stood silent at the back of his own chapel through all of it, walked the length of the aisle to the open floor. He did not raise his voice. Those who were there said afterward that the terrible thing was how quiet he was. He asked to see the papers Mr. Prentice had produced. He was given them, for how could he be refused before the county? He looked at them a moment, and he set them down, and he drew from his breast pocket a single playing card with its corner cut away, and a paper sealed with black wax, and he held them up where the light from the chapel window fell on them, and he spoke 8 words into the silence. My brother left the truth. Here it is. The chapel, they said, went so still. You could hear the frozen trees outside. The Earl opened the black sealed paper in his brother's own furious hand, the date, the name, the word, and he read it aloud. And it named not Edmund, but the man Vane, the traitor. And it laid out in a dying soldier's script the whole of what had been done, and by whom, and it matched corner to cut corner, the token Edmund had carried to his death. And Mr. Prentice's forged packet, laid beside a paper the whole county could see was genuine in its grief and its fury, became in an instant what it was. A lie, clumsy in the light. And every gentleman in the chapel understood at once that the proof of guilt had been planted, and the proof of innocence had survived it. Lady Sabine did not fragment all at once. She was too great a woman for that. Those who watched her said her fan came up a half-inch too high, and stopped there, and did not move, and that she looked at the card in her nephew's hand, as a person looks at a floor that is open beneath them, and that when she began to speak, she found she had nothing polished left to say. "That is not," she began, and stopped. "The girl, the chambermaid. She is a thief. She has." And there she stopped again, because she had reached for the maid who was not there to be blamed, and had, in reaching, told the whole county that she had known there was a girl, and known there was a card, and known enough to turn the girl off at dawn before the witnesses came. She had in her one unpolished moment named the seam. She had tried to put her weight on, and the county saw it. The Earl looked at his aunt then, and he did not gloat, and he did not raise his voice. And those who were there said his mercy was more terrible than any fury would have been. "You will leave Renfield today," he said. "You will keep your name, because it was my uncle's, and I will not do to you what you did to my brother. You will leave, though, and you will not return, and the county has seen why." And then, before all of them, in the chapel where his brother had been named a traitor and was now unnamed, the Earl of Havering asked where the chambermaid Coyle had been sent. They told him she had been turned off at the gate at dawn. And the Earl, who had produced his proof with such terrible quiet, turned and walked out of his own vindication in the middle of the county's murmuring, and went himself, without his coat, into the gray cold, down the frozen drive to the gate, to find the girl who had found the card. She was still there. She had nowhere in the world to go, and so she had waited on the low wall by the gate, with her box beside her and the cold in her thin cloak. And when she saw him coming down the drive in his shirt-sleeves with no hat and no coat, she stood up, and her heart, which had held steady through a night of tilting, and she pressed her raw hand flat to the cold stone of the gate-post to keep her feet. He stopped an arm's length from her, as he had in the gallery on the first night, and he was breathing hard from the walk in the cold, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. "You let them turn you off," he said at last. "You let her put you out at the gate. You could have come to me in the night. Why did you not come to me? Because she was watching. For exactly that, my lord, Esther said, and because I had told you to move last. I could not tell you to move last and then lose my own nerve and move first. I had to trust you would look down. You said you would look down. Her voice was steady and her hand on the gatepost was not. You looked down. The Earl of Havering closed the arm's length between them, and he took her cold hand from the gatepost into both of his own, which was the first time in the whole of it that he had touched her, and he did not let it go. Esther, he said low, the words unsteady in a way she had never heard from him. I have spent 2 years believing I buried my brother under a lie, and grieving alone, and calling it coldness so that no one would see the grief. And a girl who lays fires found in 3 weeks what I could not find in 2 years, and would not let me spoil it, and would not let me carry it for her, and let herself be put out at my own gate, rather than risk the whole of it on her own comfort. He stopped. His hands tightened on hers. I do not want you to lay my fires. I want you at my table. I want you in the whole board of my life. Seeing the parts of it I cannot see. I have been asking you to let me carry things, and I have headed backward from the first night. I do not want to carry you. I want to see the whole board with you, and move last, together, for the rest of it. Esther looked up at him, at the gray eyes that had gone at the portrait and away from it on the first night, at the face the whole county had called cold, and she had never once believed, and she felt the last careful bolt she had kept fastened, somewhere behind her ribs slide open. That is a great deal to want from the girl who does the fires, my lord, she said, and the wryness in it trembled. I am done with my lord in your mouth, he said. My name is Julian. Say it once, and I will know you mean it, and I will not ask you for anything again that you do not freely give. Julian, she said. It was the first time. It came out of her like a held breath finally let go. And there at the gate of Renfield in the gray winter cold with the county still murmuring in the chapel behind them, and a dowager packing her diamonds and a dead man's name made clean at last, the Earl of Havering lifted the chambermaid's cold, raw hand to his mouth and held it there. And it was not a great deal more than that. A hand held to warm lips at a gate, but it held all the promise a kiss could hold, and Esther, who had come to the house with a dead woman's reference and a debt she would never speak, understood that she had been seen entire, at last, by the one person in the world whose seeing reordered everything. They did not marry in haste. He would not have her enter his house as anything the county could whisper over, and she would not enter it any way but with her head high. And so there was a proper courtship through the spring, strange and grave and watched, an earl walking out with the woman who had been his chambermaid, and the county, which had seen with its own eyes what she had done in that chapel, found in the end that it had no whisper to make. Miss Marsh married a baronet in the summer, and was not sorry. Lady Sabine kept her name and her diamonds, and lived out her years in a house by the sea, and was never spoken of at Renfield again. Mr. Prentice's case did not fare well, and he left the neighborhood, and no one troubled to learn where he went. And in the family vault beneath the reconsecrated chapel, a small new stone was set beside the old Earl's, and it named Edmund Ashby, not traitor, but soldier, and the truth of him, cut corner to cut corner, was laid to rest where the lie had lain. The following winter, on the coldest morning of the year, Esther knelt on the chapel floor at Renfield, not to scrub it, for she scrubbed no floors now, but because she had wanted, once more, to kneel where the slate had rocked beneath her knee, and changed the whole course of her life. The stone was set true, and would not rock again. She laid her hand flat on it, on the cold slate above the mended hollow, and she thought of the girl who had knelt there a year before, with a card in her raw hand, and no notion in the world what to do. And she was glad on the whole that the girl had put the card in her apron instead of carrying it to the housekeeper, because a careful woman who sees the whole board waits, and moves last, and wins. Behind her the chapel door opened, and she did not need to turn to know it was Julian, because she had always known from the first night in the gallery exactly where he was in any room. He crossed the floor and knelt beside her on the cold slate, careless of his fine coat, and looked at the small new stone with the name made clean, and neither of them said anything for a while. On the deal table in the library, that night, a single playing card, with its corner cut away, lay in a small glass case, kept not as a wound, but as a keeping. The knave of spades that a dying soldier had cut in half, so that 11 years, and a chambermaid later. Esther looked at it sometimes in the evenings when the fire was laid by other hands, now when she thought that a life could turn on so small a thing as a slate that rocked, and a woman careful enough to look down, and a man who learned at the last to look down too. If Esther's story has stayed with you, stay a moment longer in the quiet of it before you go, and think of the ones the world has decided not to see, and look down where you are. For you never know what waits beneath the floor you kneel on. Thank you for staying until the end.